The leaves go wrong in a way most people do not catch for the first few days. Not yellow from heat, not brown from drought. Spotted and mottled, spreading a little more each time you look. So you drive to the garden store. You come back with a bottle, a fungicide most likely. You spray and wait. The spotting does not stop. You go back for a second bottle, then a third. Go add up those receipts. The fungicide, the insecticide, the root rot treatment, the spray for leaf spot, the powder for soil disease. Most people who work through that list in a single season spend somewhere between $60 and $80, coming at the same problem from 5 directions at once, and the plant they were most worried about is still not right by the end of August. The answer was in your kitchen spice cabinet the entire time. It costs less than $2. It works as a spray on the leaf surface, as a drench at the root, and as a wound treatment on a cut or broken stem. It does not kill disease after the fact. It builds the plant that fights disease for itself before you ever see a single spot. 4 minutes to mix. My name is Elias. I am Amish. My family has farmed this ground in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania since 1838, and I have grown a kitchen garden every single year of my life. Today, I am going to walk you through exactly how to make and use this elixir, both the foliar spray and the soil drench, the amounts, the ingredients, and the one piece of timing that almost everyone skips, and that makes the difference between a method that works reliably all season and one that helps only a little. Quick word before I show you exactly how we put this to work. A lot of the old methods my family uses never fit into a single video. That is what the book is for. A new edition is coming soon, updated and expanded, and it will be available only here on this channel. The old edition was $47. This one will be $39. If you want it, it will be there. Now, one thing before the recipe. The last section of this video is about the order in which you apply the spray and the drench on the same morning, and why getting that sequence right is what separates results that hold all season from results that fade after 2 weeks. Stay for that. And if you have not yet subscribed, do it before you forget. Here is the idea that changes how you think about plant disease. You are not fighting the disease. You are building a plant that fights for itself. Those are two different things. A fungicide kills the pathogen after it has already landed on your plant. Reactive, same as a bandage. What I am about to describe works the other way. It builds a standing defense inside the plant that holds for weeks after a single application. The plant is not cured. It is made into something disease has a harder time taking hold of. That is a different kind of help. I want to tell you where this began before I give you the recipe. Most of what I know about the summer kitchen, the small separate building just off the back of this farmhouse where the hot work happens from June through September, I learned from my mother, starting when I was 8 years old, standing at the counter while she worked. She was not a wasteful person. When she rinsed out a wooden bowl or a pot that had held ground turmeric, she did not pour that rinse water down a drain. She carried it out the side door and poured it onto the herb bed that ran along the outer wall of the summer kitchen. Basil, parsley, a row of thyme. She had done it for as long as I could remember before I ever thought to ask why. One summer when I was older, I noticed that the herbs in that particular bed were almost never touched by the aphids and leaf spots that visited other parts of the garden. The plants in that strip looked different from the ones farther away from the kitchen. Healthier in a way I could not quite name at the time. When I asked my mother about it, she said it simply. Her own mother had told her not to waste the spice water, that the kitchen and the garden had always been fed from the same pot. She was not following a formula. She was following a habit passed down from one generation to the next, and the reason it worked was buried in that habit the whole time. The kitchen and the garden were once the same system. The person tending the summer kitchen and the person working the garden were very often the same person, and what worked in one place was carried into the other without needing an explanation. When that connection broke, first by convenience, then by habit, people stopped carrying the spice water out the door and started driving to the store instead. Nobody planned that. It simply happened, and most American gardeners have been paying for it in the chemical aisle every spring since. The ingredient is ground turmeric powder, the kind in the spice aisle. The active compound in it is curcumin, and curcumin does something that very few natural substances can. It works both on the surface of plant tissue and in the soil because it behaves differently depending on where it lands. On a leaf, it creates a mild hostile environment for fungal spores and repels soft-bodied insects, including aphids and whiteflies. In the soil, it supports healthy microbial balance and is gently toxic to the nematodes and bacterial pathogens that damage roots from below. Sprinkled dry on a stem wound or a pruning cut, it seals the exposed tissue while the plant heals. It also triggers what is called systemic acquired resistance, a standing internal defense that the plant maintains across its leaves, stems, and roots for weeks after a single application. You are not just treating the surface, you are waking something up inside the plant. One compound, one jar under $2. And every one of those jobs costs less than what a single bottle from the garden store would have charged you for just one of them. Now, the recipe. I am going to give you two versions, one for the foliar spray and one for the soil drench. They use the same 3 ingredients but at different concentrations, and both come together in a few minutes with things most of you have at home right now. The first ingredient is ground turmeric powder, 1 level tablespoon, not heaping. The freshness of the turmeric matters more than the brand, because curcumin degrades over time in a stored powder. If your turmeric has been in the cabinet for more than a year, use 1.5 tablespoons. If it is reasonably fresh, 1 level tablespoon is the right amount. The second ingredient is whole milk. 1 cup, not low fat, not skim. Whole milk specifically because of the casein protein it contains. Casein does something plain water cannot. It forms a thin physical film on the surface of a leaf that holds the turmeric compounds in contact with the tissue for roughly 72 hours after the spray dries. Skim milk has almost no casein. If you use skim milk in a foliar application, the turmeric sits briefly on the leaf surface and is gone within a few hours, washed off by humidity or dew before it has time to do its work. Whole milk is not a substitute in this formula. It is the carrier that makes the formula hold. Without it, you have turmeric water, which fades quickly. With it, you have something that stays working between applications. The third ingredient is liquid Castile soap, 1 teaspoon. This is a soap pressed from plant oils, without synthetic chemicals. It has 2 jobs here. First, it acts as a surfactant, helping the liquid spread evenly across the leaf surface instead of beating up and rolling off. Second, Castile soap has its own mild contact action against soft-bodied insects, which adds to the repellent effect of the turmeric on the foliar spray. 1 teaspoon only. More soap than that begins to block the small openings on leaf surfaces through which the plant breathes, and you do not want to interfere with that. For the foliar spray, mix those 3 ingredients into 1 quart of lukewarm water, not hot. Hot water degrades the curcumin before it ever reaches the plant. Dissolve the turmeric fully into the milk first, stirring until no powder clumps remain, then add the Castile soap, then pour that mixture into your water and shake well. Turmeric settles quickly in liquid, so shake again before each use. For the soil drench, use the same 3 ingredients at the same amounts, but in 1 full gallon of water rather than 1 quart. The higher dilution is intentional. A drench moves slowly through the soil and root zone over several hours, so a more diluted concentration spread over a larger volume reaches more of the root system than a concentrated dose sitting in one spot. Apply about 1 full cup of the drench mixture around the base of each plant in a ring 6 to 8 inches out from the stem where the feeding roots are active, not directly against the stem itself, out in the ring. For heavy clay soil, limit the soil drench to once every 2 weeks rather than weekly. Clay holds moisture longer, and too much biological stimulation in already saturated soil can upset the balance rather than improve it. Now, the piece I promised at the beginning. Both applications work well on their own, but if you plan to do them both in the same session, which is what I recommend, there is an order that matters more than most people know, and it is the single thing I have not seen explained anywhere. Do the foliar spray first, early in the morning before 9 o'clock, before the sun is high enough to create heat on a wet leaf surface. Spray the top of every leaf and, just as importantly, the underside. Most fungal disease and most soft-bodied insects live on the underside of leaves. The top surface application protects from above. The underside application is where the real work happens. After you have finished spraying, walk away for 30 minutes. Let the spray dry. Let the milk film set on the leaf surface. Then, and only then, mix and apply the soil drench. Here is the reason the order matters. The stomata, the small pores through which a plant breathes and absorbs compounds through its leaves, are widest open in the early morning and begin to narrow as temperature rises through the day. When you apply the foliar spray during that window, the curcumin compounds do not merely sit on the surface. They are drawn into the leaf tissue itself through those open pores, and that is where the systemic response you are trying to trigger actually begins. If you do the soil drench first and then spray the leaves, you have already directed the plant's activity downward toward the root zone. The foliar application finds a plant that is not fully open to receiving it. More of the compounds evaporate from the leaf surface before they can be absorbed, and the systemic response is weaker for it. The way I remember this rule is the way my mother taught me to think about the kitchen garden. Treat what you can see first, then treat what you cannot. The leaf before the root. That is the whole of it. I will be honest with you throughout, because that is worth more to you than false promises. This formula does not rescue a plant that is already heavily diseased and past the point of recovery. If your tomato has lost more than a third of its foliage to blight and the stem is already compromised, this will slow the spread, but it will not reverse the damage done. What this method does best is prevention, and the early weeks of the season, before you see any symptoms at all, are when it does the most good. A plant that has been on this program since early June handles the disease pressure of August in a way that a plant started on it in August simply does not. Begin before the problem arrives, not after. There are two situations where you hold back entirely. The first is the middle of a hot day, when the soil is dry and the air sits above 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Do not drench dry roots in heat. Wet the ground lightly with plain water first. Wait until the soil is damp and then apply. The second is when the soil is already saturated from a heavy rain. Pouring more liquid into waterlogged ground does nothing useful and can stress the roots. Wait a day. One missed application in a weekly schedule does no harm to the program. I also want to mention the dry powder because it has one use that does not involve any liquid at all. If a stem breaks in a summer storm, or if you make a pruning cut that leaves an open wound on the plant, press a small pinch of dry turmeric against the cut surface. It draws moisture away from the exposed tissue, creates a mild antimicrobial barrier right at the wound, and lets the plant begin to callus over without an infection taking hold first. My mother kept a small tin of dry turmeric on the shelf just outside the summer kitchen door for exactly this purpose. She did not call it plant medicine. She called it plain sense. Here is your plan for the next few days. Tonight, check your spice cabinet. If you have ground turmeric, you can start tomorrow morning. If you do not, one bag at any grocery store costs less than $2 and gives you enough for a full season of weekly applications in an average kitchen garden. Tomorrow morning before 9 o'clock, mix the foliar spray. 1 tablespoon of turmeric dissolved into 1 cup of whole milk, 1 teaspoon of Castile soap, 1 quart of lukewarm water. Shake well and spray every plant you want to protect, top and underside of each leaf. Wait 30 minutes. Mix the soil drench at the gallon dilution and apply 1 cup around the base of each plant. Do this once a week for the first 3 weeks of the program, then every 10 days through the rest of the growing season. Before I finish, one thing plainly. The garden supply aisle at any store near you sells 5 or 6 separate products for 5 or 6 separate problems that all share the same root cause: a plant not building its own resistance. Not one of those products teaches the plant to defend itself. They manage symptoms. A jar of turmeric at $1.89, 1 cup of whole milk, and 1 teaspoon of Castile soap handles almost everything on that shelf at a fraction of the price and in a way that works with the plant's own biology rather than bypassing it. There is no money in that sentence. There is no shelf space for a recipe card that tells you the spice cabinet is where you should have been looking. So most people never hear it. The information stays in places like the summer kitchen my mother worked in for 40 years, passed from one hand to the next until someone thinks to write it down. Tell me in the comments what kind of disease or pest trouble has been the hardest thing in your garden this season. Tell me what state you are in and whether your soil runs clay or sand or good dark loam. And tell me whether you have turmeric in the kitchen right now. I read every single one. Next time, I want to show you something my mother taught me that has no tool and no ingredient: how to read what a tomato plant is short of just by looking at the color of a single leaf. No kit, no test, no laboratory, just the leaf in your hand and what the color tells you if you know the language. That is the next video. Subscribe so you do not miss it. Stay watchful, stay plain. And remember, the people who built this country with their hands knew things we are only just beginning to remember.